On the night of January 24, 1945, the forest east of Rastenburg shook. German engineers had packed Hitler's Lair with explosives, 8 tons for a single bunker, and set them off in the dark. Witnesses felt the ice crack on the lakes. For 3.5 years, this had been Hitler's command post in the east. Now his own army was trying to wipe it off the map. It failed. The bunkers were too strong to destroy, and they have outlasted the men who built them and the army that tried to erase them. The Lair was never meant to be found, let alone lost. Built in 1940 and 1941 in the Masurian woods near the village of Görlitz, today Gierlitz, it was hidden so well that aircraft overhead saw nothing but forest. Netting hung between the pines, grass and shrubs grew on the bunker roofs. Behind that screen sat a small city, more than 80 concrete buildings, around 100 wooden barracks, over 2,000 staff. From here, starting in June 1941, Hitler ran the war in the east for more than 800 days, longer than he spent anywhere else. By the autumn of 1944, the war had turned against Germany. In October, Red Army troops reached the borders of East Prussia. On November 20, 1944, Hitler left the Lair for the last time and moved his headquarters to Zossen, near Berlin. 2 days later, Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel ordered the complex destroyed. The reasoning was part practical and part doctrine. The bunkers could not be allowed to become a fortress the advancing enemy might use, and the order matched the scorched earth tactics both sides had turned to as they retreated. The demolition came on the night of January 24-25, 1945. Engineers mined the entire complex and set it off section by section. Blocks of concrete were thrown 20 or 30 meters into the air and smaller debris flew several hundred. An estimated 8 tons of TNT went into a single bunker. Hitler's personal bunker, its walls and roofs several meters thick, took the worst of it and was cracked clean through on one face. But the engineers had set out to flatten the place, and they did not. Most of the heavy bunkers survived. The concrete was too solid, the explosives too few, the winter too hard, and the enemy too close. The lighter barracks were wrecked, but the great shelters only slumped and split. From a military standpoint, the operation came close to a failure. Instead of denying the enemy a fortress, the Germans left behind a field of broken giants that no army ever fought over. On January 27, 1945, soldiers of the Soviet 31st Army walked into the ruins without firing a shot. The same day, far to the south, the Red Army reached Auschwitz. The Lair had stood empty for weeks. What the Germans handed to the new owners of this ground was not a battlefield, it was a problem. The first problem was that almost no one could safely walk into it. Around the whole site, the Germans had laid one of the densest minefields of the war, a belt of barbed wire enclosing a strip up to 150 meters wide, sown so thickly with anti-personnel and anti-tank mines that crossing it on foot without stepping on one was nearly impossible. Soviet engineers cleared the access roads in 1945, but the field itself was left for Polish sappers, and the work would stretch across nearly 10 years. The Germans had left no map. When the 2nd Warsaw Heavy Sapper Brigade arrived in the spring of 1952, its orders said to treat the ground as completely unknown. On April 7th, a reconnaissance company under Lieutenant Stefan Widlak went in first, with a single job, to work out how the field had been built. Mine by mine, the men pieced the pattern together. Which rows held anti-tank mines, which held the S mines that sprang waist-high before going off, until the rest of the brigade could follow them in. The work was slow, and it was deadly. Most of the mines could not be lifted by hand, and many were rigged so they could not be disarmed. So the sappers marked each one and destroyed it where it lay. The records keep the names of the ones it cost. On April 28, 1952, a mine killed sapper Władysław Baginski. The next summer, on June 26, 1953, an anti-tank mine killed sapper Jerzy Morawski. They were not the first. Back in 1949, a senior sapper named Michtel had been carried off the field and died in the hospital at Ketzrin. 3 sappers were killed clearing Hitler's old headquarters, and 3 more were badly hurt. The war had been over for 7 years, but at the Lair it was still killing Polish soldiers, 1 mine at a time. By the time the work was finished, units from across the Polish army had passed through. The army's own records put what they cleared at more than 65,000 mines, a quarter of them anti-tank. The last ground was handed back to civilian authorities on October 29, 1955, more than 10 years after the war had ended. Decades later, in 2003, a memorial was unveiled among the ruins to the men who never came home from the clearance. While the sappers worked, the site itself was being carried away. Polish families resettling the region took what they could use: brick, steel, timber, copper wire, and more was hauled west to help rebuild Warsaw, gutted in the war. Cobblestones, concrete, granite, and marbles from the Wolf's Lair went into the capital's streets, its airport's runways, and its new public buildings. Piece by piece, Hitler's Eastern Command post was recycled into the country he had set out to destroy. Once the ground was safe, a stranger fate took hold. People began to come and look at it. In 1959, 4 years after the demining ended, the Wolf's Lair was opened to the public. The Polish State Forestry Service, through the Srokowo Forest District, took charge of the ruins as a tourist site, and visitors started arriving from across the country and, in time, from around the world. What they came to see was a forest full of broken bunkers. The shelters of Hitler, Goering, Bormann, Keitel, and Jodl still stood where the explosions had left them. Walls leaning, roofs caved in, each one now marked with a painted number for the tour map. Goering's bunker, less damaged than the rest, could still be walked into. The most visited spot, though, was not a bunker at all but a foundation. On July 20, 1944, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg had placed a bomb in a briefing hut here in the attempt to take Hitler's life. The hut is gone, but a stone memorial to Stauffenberg and his fellow conspirators marks the place. For decades, the site drew a steady stream of visitors. By 2019, it was taking in close to 300,000 a year, with a hotel, a restaurant, and a campsite built among the trees. That commercial success brought trouble. The same year, the Forest District's renovation plans set off a public argument. Proposals reported in the press, waitresses in period uniform, a shooting range, waxwork scenes of the assassination, drew accusations that the site was being turned into a Nazi Disneyland. A Polish historian warned the BBC that putting actors in Nazi uniforms at the place would be insane and outrageous. The district promised to keep due seriousness and respect for historical truth, and the most extreme ideas were dropped. That argument sat on top of an older one about who should run the place at all. In 2012, the Forest District had leased the site to a private company for 20 years. By 2015, the foresters had cancelled the deal, saying the company had stopped paying rent and done none of the promised upkeep. The case ran through the courts until 2017, when an appeal court in Białystok confirmed the lease had been lawfully ended and cleared the way for the state to take the ruins back. 8 decades after the war, the Wolf's Lair had settled into an uneasy role, a place of real history and a difficult attraction at the same time, where the hard question was always how to show such a site without glorifying what had happened there. And then, beneath the house of one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany, the forest gave up something no map had ever recorded. In February 2024, a volunteer named Adrian Kostreva was digging beneath the ruins of Hermann Goering's house. Kostreva, an engineer from Gdansk, belonged to the Latebra Foundation, a group of history enthusiasts permitted to carry out archaeological work at the site. Working under what had once been the floor of the house, he had reached for what he took to be a length of old plumbing pipe. It was a human skull. The volunteers stopped and called the authorities. As the ground was opened up, more bones came out of it, enough to show that this was not one person, but the remains of at least 4. There was no trace of clothing, and what was recovered was incomplete. Nearly all of them were missing their hands and feet, and only one kept so much as a few toe bones. When examiners studied the remains, they concluded the bones belonged to at least 4 people. 3 of them most likely middle-aged men, the 4th a child whose age and sex could not be fixed. The remains were old, dated somewhere around the war years, but too far gone to show how any of these people had died. That left the question of how they got there, and the people who knew the site best could only offer theories. The head of the local forest district thought the dead had most likely been buried soon after the war, and might have been victims of the Soviet troops who occupied the ruins once the fighting stopped. Another possibility pointed straight back to the minefield, that they had strayed in and been caught by the mines that were still killing men into the 1950s. A darker and far-fetched idea tied them to the occult leanings of some in the SS. None of it could be proven. In the spring of 2024, the district prosecutor's office in Olsztyn closed the case. There were no marks on the bones to point to a crime, and with the cause of death beyond reach, there was nothing left to investigate. The remains were handed to the local authorities for burial. The Forest District chose to make the discovery public anyway, in the hope that someone, somewhere, might know who these people were. It's a fitting end to the story of the Wolf's Lair after the war. The complex was built to be invisible, then blown apart to be erased, then cleared, stripped, and turned into a place tourists walk through with a map in hand. And still it has not finished surprising the people who think they know it. The forest holds what the concrete could not, and 80 years on, it's still giving up its secrets one at a time. Thank you for watching. If you found this video insightful, watch what happened to the Führer bunker after 1945 next. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more history inside, and we'll see you in the next one.